Well, hello there, and welcome to the show. Once again, it is Tuesday. Once again, a chance for me to sit down with my friend Eric Peters from Eric Peters Autos. Eric, how are you today?
I'm good. I'm trying to wade through the ocean of lies to discern what truth there is out there.
Isn't that a full-time job? I mean, I'm kind of halfway joking there. You and I think both we put food on the table trying to help people see truth or find truth, and uh, but yeah, it is. It's if you want to know what's real and what versus what isn't, your work is cut out for you.
Yeah, I think the operating premise to start with is to assume that everything that you hear is probably false until you can establish whether it in fact is true. And you and I were talking a little bit off the air about how to discern truth. And you were mentioning how some people are really good at spotting AI. And I've read about that too. And apparently this is a skill that the kids have developed because they're native in this, they've grown up in this. Like the Gen Zs, not the Gen Zs, what do they call it? The Zoomers, they can pick it out. I can't, not nearly that well. I've done a number of these tests. Have you ever tried it? Where they'll show you like 10 images and you're supposed to pick which ones are fake and which ones are real. My accuracy is not that good. I get about 60%.
Wow, Eric, it sounds like we're getting older, both of
Yeah,
us.
well, I guess,
No,
but again, we're not native. I guess our
no.
brains and our eyes aren't trained to pick things out the way the younger generation is able to. That said, there is a way, kind of an analog way, if you will, a Gen X way to discern truth that I found handy in my life, and that's just etymological accuracy. Really considering what words are when they're used and what they mean, and not letting when you're having a conversation with somebody or when you're reading something and you'll see a word used and you can develop this habit of saying, wait a minute, what do they mean by that? What does that word mean? Because that's important. Hard stop. You really can't intelligently understand something until you understand what's being talked about. So it's important to not be sloppy with word choice, and it's not important to be discerning with the words that you read and carefully deconstruct what you're reading before you accept whatever you're being trained to think you read.
I think that's really a solid way to approach it. And even when you're having discussions with people, I spent about I think I tallied up about 44 hours last week sitting at the county fair at a candidate's booth because I'm running for office, and I talked to a lot of different people from all different ideologies and walks of life. And it was interesting. Some of them came and they were pretty antagonistic and wanted to. I mean, some were you Republicans love Trump too much, and others you don't love him enough. And the thing I found though is you cannot have a productive conversation if someone just wants to argue. Then great, dive right in. But if you really want to have a conversation where there's some actual light instead of just smoke and heat, you got to be willing to define your terms. And people don't like it when you ask them, wait, what does that mean? When you say, you people are consistently keeping other people down. Okay, what does that mean?
Yeah.
Be specific and give me an example so that I can understand what you're trying to say. Because otherwise, it's just, it basically this is becoming a struggle session.
Yeah. I mean, ideology is so metastasized and weaponized in this country in a way that it never used to be. People used to have normal conversations because people weren't so ideologically driven as they are today. Of course, people were in the past, they were Republicans or they were Democrats, but it was in a more nominal sense. It wasn't as if they had welded themselves to the talking points of their party. And when they heard any talking point that in any way deviated from their talking points, they erupted in fulminating anger. You were able to say, well, wait a minute, what do you think about this? And then the fact gets put on the table and you can bandy it back and forth and address its implications. That's a rare thing today. And I'd like to see us get back to that because isn't it kind of a cornerstone of civilization to be able to do that? If
Oh
we if we
yeah.
if we live in an age where it's like an orthodoxy almost, it's kind of like it's like fanatical religion without the religion. It's a secularized fanaticism where you have to believe in the dogma. You've got to believe in this coda and perform all the rituals, and if you don't do it, then you're an apostate and let's burn you at the stake.
Right. Well, and part of the problem, and this goes back to what you were suggesting earlier about individually, we have to be willing to do the hard work of really understanding what we're considering, whether we're reading it, whether we're discussing it, watching a video, whatever. We have to be self-directed in our learning to where we're not dependent on someone else to explain it to us like we were a not so bright child. I mean, you hear the word autodidact, and I wish it was more common, among, in everyday conversation. That's not just reading books without a teacher there. It's developing your ability to to basically mine truth from any source, or to consider any source and sift the truth from the error without becoming dependent on some authority figure to tell you that's right, or no, 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 you can't go there.
Yeah, that's one of the things that I've always found so admirable about those, white wig wearing guys from the 18th century. Men like Jefferson, and even more so Franklin, who had no formal education, and yet they acquired an immense body of knowledge across multiple fields and disciplines. They were fluent in multiple different languages. They understood science. They understood art. They had an appreciation for literature. All these things. They were what was once called Renaissance men. That they weren't this narrowly blinkered people who focused on this one specialty thing and knew nothing about anything else, which is kind of, it's like a stunting, isn't it? To be a human, to only know one particular thing with any competence, and everything else you're just sort of indifferent to and oblivious of.
Yep. I hate to run into those areas of my life where I don't have the background or understanding. Mechanics, for instance, if something goes wrong with my car, simple things I can fix, changing the wiper blades and whatnot. But if it's time to, bore out the cylinders, not going to happen with me. I don't have the tools or the know-how to make that happen.
But you could.
I could. Yes.
Almost anything within reason, in terms of just the necessary skills that most people, I think certainly most men, ought to possess. It's not that challenging to learn how to frame a wall, for example, or to comprehend how to run a circuit, or to do basic plumbing work, things like that, and to, just fix basic things that need to be fixed around the house, as opposed to, oh my gosh, it's broken, I better call the man. Or better
Yes.
better take the mower, down to Fred and have Fred fix it. Really, it's a relatively simple thing if you just have the gumption to kind of look at it, consider it. And today, we do have, as much as we complain about things, there are also some really good things about today. I mean, I'm a pretty good mechanic, but sometimes I get stumped. You can go to YouTube and you can find almost certainly somebody else who's dealt with exactly whatever the problem is you're dealing with, and enlighten you, and you can go, wow, whereas in the past it would have been next to impossible to figure it out. So we do have these tools that we could make use of in a positive way, and I recommend that people do that.
I think one of the things that prevents people, I'm speaking primarily of myself here, from trying new things. I want to rewire just a simple wall socket, or a light switch or something like that. It's the fear of failure that
Sure.
keeps us from learning stuff that we don't already know. But I have nothing but admiration for the people who dive in, and then maybe they make a mistake. Whoop, I got bit. I touched the pliers to the wrong wire, or there was a spark and it
None of
scared the
us
crap out of me. But,
the human
you know,
race would go out of existence if we didn't do that. Would you have ever had a date, when you were in junior high? You had to summon up the gumption to go talk to that girl over there, right? Scary. She might reject you and laugh at you, but you overcame that and went over and talked to her. That's life. It transcends everything. Of course, when you do something for the first time, you're a little worried because gosh, I really have no clue what I'm doing here, but I'm going to give it a try, and let's see what happens. That's what I did when I was a kid. I didn't get to where I am as far as being able to take engines apart, poof, just like that. When I was a kid, I used to take apart weed whackers and lawnmowers, and I got to understand how they worked. And the light went on, and it progressed, and I got to the point where I could deal with more challenging things. That's how life is. We're not born able to talk. We learn the basic sounds, then we learn words, then we learn how to put the words together, and before you know it, we're able to have a conversation like we're having right now.
Yep. And it's, the whole point here isn't just we're not trying to go win big on Jeopardy, or, to be the smartest person in the room. It's about learning to see the world as it is. And again, not be dependent intellectually or otherwise on other people to tell us what it all means. And this is why you had mentioned, reading is so important. If you're studying history, if you're studying psychology, if you're studying economics, religion, political theory, human behavior, at some point you start to see there are threads that connect all of these different disciplines and subjects. And when you start making those connections, suddenly the world starts making a whole lot more sense. Again, it's not that you have all the answers, but you start to see that this is not just a totally detached, oh, well, this is only for, people who have horn-rimmed glasses or, sit and smoke a pipe while they read, the opinion section of the Wall Street Journal. It's about trying to understand the world, pay the price for it, and above all, to question or to examine the information, I guess is how I would put it. You learn how to think about the information you're considering, and it will sharpen your skills. You'll learn to see what adds up and what doesn't. I think you also will learn to spot AI a little bit better too, but that's purely opinion.
Yeah, maybe so. I mean, it's not a flex. It really isn't. It's about just mastery and feeling good. Think how good every one of us has had this experience where there's been some kind of challenging job that you're really not sure that you're going to be able to deal with, but you do it and you succeed and you feel great having done that. Why? Because it's like competence. You've learned how to do something. That's not arrogant. It's good. It's that's what it means to grow up. It's what it means to be a human being. Now, as far as discerning the BS, I guess I have to thank the motor gods for being a journalist because at one time, believe it or not, this is a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away, there used to be this thing called the copy desk. And when you submitted an article and they found what was called editorializing, meaning you were trying to stilt the story to convey your opinion about something, they'd call you
Right.
on it. So you can't do that. You have to change this. You have to rewrite that paragraph. You've simply got to, your job as a journalist is to convey the facts, not your interpretation of the facts, the facts. Let the readers interpret the facts. The editorial page is where there's opinion. There used to be this clear line of separation between the two. Unfortunately, there isn't anymore.
No, because we live in a clickbait universe. And the headlines are often AI generated, but they're calculated to engage you either with anger or fear or some salaciousness. Oh wow, that's titillating. Let me click on this and find out. But is there substance? You maybe find out a little bit late that no, it was just a bright shiny lure, and you bit when you clicked on the link.
Yes. Now, the upside to this is that we have this additional responsibility to be careful and judicious and to not rely and trust what we read. That's a good thing. You and I grew up at a time where, we had Walter Cronkite and those guys and, the Wall Street Journal. And that was sort of the Pravda. Whatever they said, we took it sort of as that's the truth. If Walter Cronkite says it, it's got to be true. Remember that? Well, today, everything they say must be presumed to be not true. That's healthy. I mean, I know it's cynical at this, but at the same time, it is healthy to develop skepticism, especially as regards people that you don't personally know. Trust is an important thing. We learn to trust people in our own lives, our friends and our family, people that we've done business with. They have earned our trust. Trust needs to be earned, not just given away promiscuously to random strangers we don't know. We see some guy on the TV, we shouldn't necessarily trust what this random stranger is telling us because we don't know this guy. We don't know whether he's getting a check under the table to try to manipulate us and to get us to be angry or scared about something. So this is healthy, I think.
Yep, and it's less about boy, I'm right about everything. Look how often I'm right. I mean,
Yeah.
does that sound like anybody you know of? I never say anything wrong. I'm really good at this. Yeah. It's not about I must be right. It's about recognizing things. Ooh, that deserves a closer look, and then being willing to pay the price of giving it a closer look.
Sure. And the more you know, the more you respect people who know more than you do. I've been enjoying, there's a guy in Britain, his name is Milliard, and he creates these works of art with Kawasaki motorcycles. The guy's a mechanical and engineering genius. I've never seen anything quite like this guy. He makes me feel like an idiot who can't change oil. That's how good this guy is. But I admire that. I love watching his videos and I love watching him do things like take, a three-cylinder engine and turn it into a five-cylinder engine. That's requires some pretty precise machine work. He does it with welds you can't see. He makes crankshafts. He makes camshafts. Again, the guy is an artist, and I just love that. And I love listening to people who know more about history than I do. I know so much. Here's my level, but there are people who know a lot more than me, and I'll listen to them and I'll read them. Wow, I wasn't aware of that. That's really interesting. Knowledge propagates and builds on itself, and this is all good. It increases the sum total of everything.
Let's talk a little bit about some current events here. Gas prices.
Yeah.
I've done a little bit of driving in the last few days, and um, I'm still walking a little bit funny from my encounters at the
Oh
gas
boy.
pump, but
Yeah.
I see gas inching up once again. What's your take? Have we finally won again in the Strait of Hormuz, or
Uh,
is there another twist in the plot?
well, obviously not. And well, the twist in the plot, I was reading about this earlier today, uh, and it had to do with the upticking in the cost of diesel, which I consider to be more relevant right now than gas prices. Yeah, it's not good that we're paying what 4.5, 4.10, 4.20 a gallon for gas. Diesel, that's potentially catastrophic because of the effects that it has on food prices, agriculture, home heating. We're not that far away from the winter season now. And, if indeed diesel prices spike due to the stupid war that Trump decided to start, the effects of that could be calamitous, absolutely calamitous. I don't want to be a panican, but I also think at the same time, it's important to not be Pollyannish and to be aware of this. Um, doesn't look good. I don't know what Trump is going to do. It seems that he's been backed into a corner. We've been backed into a corner by this war. I see the only thing that he could do that's rational to me is acknowledge this was a dumb idea, cut losses, try to deal with the Iranians in a way that will actually engender some trust. I mean, again, I'm not cheerleading for the mullahs. I'm just simply saying it's rational and reasonable that they don't trust Trump. They don't trust the federal government. Why would they? Would you in their position?
No.
So, they've got the upper hand now, and that's just it. It is what it is, and we need to make the best of it rather than make it worse.
Yep. And this brings us back to the idea of um, if you're really serious about solutions, you got to break out of that binary tribal thinking. Trump good, Trump bad. Man, I encountered a lot of people over the last week who really buy into the whole. It's the party that they identify with, and that's what shapes every thought. Um, this is one of the reasons I appreciate visiting with you so much is I know that whatever I'm getting from you, whether I agree or disagree, I'm getting what you think, and it's not just, well, what does the party say? Let me flip to whatever page addresses that issue.
It
And
gets tiresome, doesn't it? And it amazes me that the same people who were legitimately pointing out that Biden was slipping, that Biden was showing signs of dementia within his own party, too. The
right.
Democrats at the time were refusing to acknowledge that there was something wrong with Joe Biden, much to their detriment, as it turned out, because, of course, they fell apart during the 2024 election and we got Donald Trump. What's happening right now? The Republicans are closing ranks around Trump, no matter what he does. And even when he too is showing signs that maybe there's something not quite right with him, mentally and physically, they're pretending it's not happening. And the costs of that are going to be catastrophic for the country, not just for the Republican Party.
Well, and it's part of it too comes down to, some people have been trained. In fact, a lot of people sadly have been trained to see everything in terms of political power dynamics. And I can't tell you how many conversations I had over the last week where people came up and either, you know, said, well, I don't know if you want to talk to me. You wouldn't like what I have to say. And my response was always, why do we have to talk politics? There's, I'm a candidate. Yes, I'm standing at the Republican Party booth, there, but we don't have to talk politics. And yet for some people, that's the fuel that runs their lives and runs their thinking. And I kind of feel bad for them because they're missing out on a lot of great stuff.
I feel bad for us as a country. And I think that this really metastasized during COVID, when you were effectively forced to be on one side of the aisle or the other. And the people on that one side of the aisle had zero tolerance for us on the other side of the aisle. And I don't think that that's changed. We still see that. I don't know how we get beyond that other than one at a time, each of us deciding that we're not going to be part of that anymore. And we're just going to, calm down and interact with one another as individuals and assume goodwill until we have reason to believe that goodwill isn't there.
Yep. I'll admit, I kind of repressed the memories of 5 years ago and 6 years ago and how awful it was. They pop up occasionally on Facebook and I'm like, oh yeah,
Yeah.
that really sucked. But we moved on and a lot of people have kind of let it go. And yet we're not out of danger. Most of the people who are in power still have access to power. Dr. Fauci is still a free man,
Yeah.
in spite of all the things that have come out that show, holy cow, he was a little megalomaniac.
Yeah. No reckoning has happened, and I don't think any will. And I think that this is extraordinarily bad for the country. Everything that's going on right now, the common thread is no accountability, for people who do really horrendous things. And on the other hand, you and I, if a flock camera catches us making an illegal U-turn, then we'll have the cop at our door with the ticket book, right? People are becoming enraged by this, and it's understandable that they're becoming enraged by this. The cynicism, and it's justified. The extreme depravity of the federal government and its apparatchiks and what it does, as opposed to how you and I are expected to literally follow every jot and tittle of whatever the law happens to be. No matter how absurd it is, it's the law. And if not, look out, you're going to get tasered or beaten or whatever the heck it is.
Right. We're coming up on the end of the segment here, but I have to throw a quick question your way regarding the flock cameras. I saw some numbers, and I have not had the chance to verify these, so I'm throwing these out as unverified, uncorroborated numbers. But the gist of the numbers I saw basically said there were, less than 500 flock cameras scattered around the U.S. Just 2 years ago, at the beginning of 2024. It was a fairly low number. By more than 10 times the next year, that number had increased, by, tenfold. And again, another tenfold by this year. And I have to ask, how could something like that happen so quietly? How is it not the creation of a surveillance state, but we were slow to pick up on it?
Well, it was, but that's the point. They erected it without us noticing it at first. It took time. They're kind of easy to not see. These sort of little camera things that are on a black pole somewhere. Unless you're looking for it, you may not have
Right.
noticed. But then the realization came. It's kind of, I don't know, I guess it's kind of like an actual plague. When the plague starts, people don't recognize that there's a plague. And then all of a sudden, everybody's got, pustules and are flopping around on the ground. That's kind of the way that it is. And yeah, it's absolutely being pushed. And I think that there's a congruence with these data centers. These things are related. The data centers exist to store vast amounts of data. Well, where's that data coming from? Flock cameras, among other things, and all this AI stuff that's gonna not just aggregate and capture everything, but monetize and punish us for doing it. And I think that the natural instinct of self-preservation is beginning to pop up. And people recognize, in the same way that when a rabbit sees a fox, the rabbit understands, there's a threat. I think people see this, and that's good. I just hope it can be stopped in time.
We'll have to spend a little more time on flock because I know that's an issue that it's kind of coming to a boil, and people
Absolutely.
people are finding creative ways to distract or cover, or in some cases they'll back over a flock camera. By the way, I'm not advocating for destroying other people's property, but I'm also not going to advocate for, hey, you have a duty to participate in building your own chains. No,
Correct.
you don't. No, you don't. But
Yeah.
it's interesting too how civic leaders and even like down to the municipal level will close ranks to try to preserve and protect their relationship with flock safety and oh, but look, it helps the police so much, and think of how safe we are. And I think it was my friend Connor Boyack who said, yeah, the Stasi in East Germany, they kept the people very safe.
They did indeed. And there's a lot of money involved. At the end of the day, that's what corrupts everything. You and I aren't putting money in their pockets. Flock is.
Yep. Well, we got to keep our wits about us, but that starts with accepting responsibility for you are the one responsible for understanding the world around you. And if you really want to do it, you got to be willing to do the heavy lifting. So, you've got people. Eric is on your side. I'm on your side. We'll share what we can that's useful. We'll glean what we can from other people. There's always stuff to learn, but don't wait for some blow-dried spinmeister to spoon feed it to you and think, oh yes, now I'm informed. I know all about that issue.
As Ed McMahon used to say, you are correct, sir. Yes.
Eric, great as always to visit with you. I look forward to chatting with you each week. We'll send our listeners to your website where, again, they will find plenty of food for thought. Thanks again.
Thank you, amigo. Appreciate it.